Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into one of the most controversial and pressing developments in the Middle East, the Israeli Navy blocking aid flotillas bound for Gaza. This incident is sparking international debate, raising questions of legality, morality, and the humanitarian crisis that continues to unfold in Gaza. In this video, we will carefully unpack what happened, why it happened, and what it means for the wider region and the world at large. The blockade of Gaza has been in place since 2007, when Hamas took control of the Strip following a violent conflict with the Palestinian Authority. Israel, citing security reasons, imposed strict control over what enters and exits the enclave. The blockade is enforced both by land and by sea, and Egypt also controls a key crossing. Over the years, the blockade has been condemned by humanitarian groups who argue that it constitutes collective punishment, trapping over 2 million Palestinians in a territory with collapsing infrastructure, high unemployment, and limited access to medical supplies, food, and clean water. Israel, on the other hand, insists that the blockade is essential to prevent weapons, smuggling to Hamas, and other militant groups that have launched thousands of rockets toward Israeli cities. The recent incident with the flotillas represents another chapter in this ongoing struggle. Activist groups, NGOs, and international volunteers have attempted multiple times over the past decade to break the blockade by sending ships carrying aid to Gaza. These flotillas usually carry medicine, food, and other humanitarian supplies. For many activists, the goal is not just to deliver aid, but also to draw attention to the blockade and pressure governments to act. The Israeli Navy has consistently intercepted these ships before they reach Gaza, escorting them to Israeli ports where the cargo is inspected and in many cases redirected through official land crossings. This latest flotilla, like those before it, was met with a swift response from the Israeli Navy. The ships were blocked in international waters and ordered to reroute to Israeli ports. According to the Israeli government, the move was entirely legal under international maritime law, as the blockade itself has been deemed lawful by certain bodies, including a controversial United Nations inquiry in 2011. However, many international observers argue that regardless of legality, the humanitarian consequences are devastating. Aid groups stress that Gaza's population lives under severe restrictions that make daily survival a struggle. The optics of the blockade and the interception of humanitarian ships are difficult for Israel in the international arena. Images of naval warships surrounding civilian vessels carrying humanitarian activists are powerful, and they stir outrage in global public opinion. For many, the blockade symbolizes a wider injustice. The suffocating conditions imposed on Palestinians who already face political instability, unemployment rates above 50%, and an ongoing energy crisis. The Israeli argument, which emphasizes security, often struggles to compete with the human stories emerging from Gaza, such as children being treated in hospitals lacking basic medical supplies, or families surviving on food aid because the economy has been crippled by restrictions. At the same time, Israel's concerns cannot be dismissed outright. Hamas has indeed attempted to smuggle weapons into Gaza, sometimes using fishing boats, tunnels, or even humanitarian supplies. From Israel's perspective, the sea blockade is a defensive necessity to protect its citizens from rocket fire, tunnels, and armed groups. This creates a stark moral dilemma. On one hand, a state exercising its right to self-defense, and on the other hand, a population caught in the middle, paying the price in terms of humanitarian suffering. The history of flotillas adds more layers to this issue. The most infamous incident occurred in 2010 with the Mavi Marmara, a Turkish-led flotilla where Israeli commandos boarded the ship and clashes broke out, resulting in the deaths of 9 activists. That event caused a massive diplomatic fallout, especially between Israel and Turkey, and drew international condemnation. Since then, flotilla organizers have continued their efforts, but Israel has responded with greater caution, often intercepting ships with less violence, but with the same end result. The flotillas never reach Gaza. The current interception follows this established pattern, but what is changing is the political landscape. Regional alliances are shifting, with some Arab countries normalizing relations with Israel under the Abraham Accords, while others continue to support the Palestinian cause strongly. The ongoing blockade and incidents like this create friction in these delicate diplomatic balances. Internationally, Western governments are often cautious, balancing support for Israel's security, concerns with pressure from their own publics and human rights groups demanding action to ease the blockade. One cannot ignore the humanitarian picture when discussing these flotillas. Gaza's healthcare system is on the verge of collapse, with hospitals facing shortages of essential medicines and equipment. The water crisis is severe, with more than 95% of the water supply considered unsafe for consumption. Electricity is scarce, often limited to just a few hours a day. Under these conditions, aid ships become more than symbolic acts. They are seen by Palestinians as lifelines, even if the material amount of aid they carry is relatively small compared to Gaza's enormous needs. Another aspect worth considering is the media coverage and global activism surrounding these events. The flotillas are not just about aid delivery. They are designed to highlight the blockade on the world stage. Activists on board often include journalists, lawyers, politicians, and public figures who aim to maximize attention and generate political pressure. By intercepting these ships, Israel inadvertently gives them the publicity they seek. Each interception becomes a news story, fueling debates in parliaments, at the United Nations, and among the public. The question remains whether these flotillas achieve tangible change. Critics argue that they often provoke confrontation without significantly alleviating Gaza's suffering. Israel maintains that aid can, and does, enter Gaza through official channels, pointing to truckloads of supplies that are coordinated through UN agencies and NGO. However, activists counter that the controlled entry is inadequate and politically manipulated, and that the blockade itself remains the root cause of the crisis. Looking at the broader consequences, this incident is likely to reignite discussions at the United Nations and within human rights organizations. Some governments may issue statements of concern, and NGO will likely call for an end to the blockade. However, without major shifts in regional politics or international pressure, the status quo is unlikely to change. Israel is firm in its stance that the blockade is necessary for national security, and Hamas shows no signs of disarming or changing its confrontational approach. This cycle of blockade, flotilla attempts, and interception reflects the larger deadlock in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Neither side is willing or able to make the compromises required for a long-term resolution. For ordinary people in Gaza, this deadlock translates into continued hardship. For Israel, it means continued diplomatic challenges and security threats. For the international community, it remains a persistent dilemma where calls for humanitarian relief clash with geopolitical realities. As we analyze this incident, it's important to recognize the layers of complexity. There are no easy answers. Security and humanitarian concerns collide. International law is interpreted in conflicting ways, and political agendas overshadow human needs. What is clear, however, is that the blockade and incidents like this will continue to define the narrative of Gaza, Israel, and the broader Middle East conflict for years to come. The blockade is not just a policy, it has become a symbol. For Palestinians, it is a symbol of oppression and suffering. For Israel, it is a symbol of self-defense and the struggle for survival in a hostile region. For activists and NGO, it is a symbol of injustice that demands global attention. Each new flotilla and each new interception renews this debate with no clear resolution in sight. The longer the blockade continues, the deeper the humanitarian crisis in Gaza will become, and the harder it will be to find a political solution. Humanitarian aid alone cannot solve the crisis. What is needed is a sustainable political agreement that addresses both Israel's security concerns and the Palestinians' rights to freedom and dignity. Until that happens, incidents like the blockade of flotillas will continue to play out, serving as reminders of a conflict that the world has yet to resolve. So as we reflect on the Israeli Navy blocking Gaza aid flotillas once again, we are left with difficult questions. Is this truly about security, or is it about control? Is the blockade preventing weapons smuggling, or is it creating a humanitarian disaster that fuels more extremism? Are flotillas an effective tool of protest, or do they only highlight a grim stalemate? These are questions that have no simple answers, but they are questions that must continue to be asked if there is ever to be progress. Thank you for staying with us through this deep dive into one of the most pressing and emotional issues of our time. The story of the blockade, the flotillas, and the people of Gaza is far from over, and each new development reminds us of the urgent need for a solution that prioritizes both security and humanity. If you found this analysis helpful, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for more in-depth discussions on the critical issues shaping our world today.